Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen Davila, and I'm moderating this session this morning, which is the ASEAN Economic Community. What is the new context of the ASEAN Economic Community? What are the struggles in implementing a full ASEAN integration? What are the challenges? Will it be successful? What will be the difference compared to the European Union? Will it really foster one big market of 600 million people that have one common vision? So we do hope you'll be joining our discussion this morning. Our panelists are quite interesting this morning. Before I introduce the rest of our panelists, I'd like first to acknowledge the presence of the Secretary General of the ASEAN, Lee Leung Min. Good morning to you, sir. And you will be giving opening remarks for the group this morning. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you for the opportunity to join you in this important session on ASEAN, on the future prospect of growth in ASEAN, in particular on three areas of activities of your immediate concern. The ASEAN Economic Community, or the AEC, will be launched by the end of this year. And it will not be something like, something falling down from the sky. Rather, it will be, the combination of a process of building the community that is moving to completion. As of now, we have implemented around 91% of all the measures due under the AEC blueprint. And basically, a new environment for growth has been being created in ASEAN. In investment, the ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreement that ASEAN has adopted encompasses four important areas, namely liberalization, facilitation, protection, and promotion. This agreement is creating a freer and more open investment regime based on international best practices. And the key features of this agreement include a single negative list approach, where restrictions are progressively removed, immediate benefit to ASEAN investors and ASEAN-based foreign investors, and ASEAN member states' obligation to make publicly available all relevant laws and regulations on FDI. And concurrently, ASEAN is working on a number of initiatives pursuant to this agreement, such as establishing an ASEAN Invest ASEAN website to promote ASEAN as a single investment destination, disseminating guidebooks and conducting fora to help investors learn about the agreement and improving the agreement by including the mandate to further liberalize the investment regime. The creation of such a freer and more open investment regime has brought about substantial improvement. The total FDI inflow to ASEAN reached $122.4 billion in 2013, and that kept increasing in 2014, amounting to $136.2 billion, or that reflects a 11.3% increase. In consumer market improvement, ASEAN has at present a combined market of over 625 million customers and a combined GDP in 2014 of up to nearly $2.8 trillion. And by 2030, ADB expects that ASEAN middle class will grow to 54 million people, or more than 60% of the projected population of ASEAN by then. And ASEAN thus is a very competitive position for trade investment and a very strong consumer base. And ASEAN consumer market dynamics in the immediate and middle term will be shaped by a strong growth environment which will raise disposable incomes and spending. And a young population with 50% under the age of 30, and this group will drive consumer spending. A rapid urbanization rate which shapes consumption patterns and purchasing trends with high rates of growth anticipated in telecommunication services, consumer electronic products, and technologies, especially the internet, that are changing the lives of the ASEAN citizens. To seize these advantages of such shifting dynamics, businesses will have to reach out and connect with the ASEAN consumers using the new media and be innovative and alert to ASEAN fast evolving consumer trends and build secure and trusted regional platform for online purchasing and payment systems. In travel and tourism, air travel is one of ASEAN's 12 targeted priority sectors for economic integration. The multilateral agreement on the full liberalization of freight and air passenger services and the protocol of the agreement cover all ASEAN member states' secondary cities. These agreements also provide greater liberalization in terms of unlimited capacity, frequency, and the type of aircraft. The ASEAN Single Aviation Market Framework was adopted to intensify the development of the regional aviation sector, guiding the work of the ASEAN aviation sector, which includes the alignment of aviation safety and security practices, harmonization, and air traffic management. And ASEAN is also reaching out to our partners. With China, ASEAN has concluded an air transport agreement with 2 protocols covering unlimited traffic rights for the 3rd and 4th freedom traffic rights and limited 5th freedom traffic rights. With Japan, with Republic of Korea, and the EU, ASEAN has begun negotiations for such agreements. And actually, Boeing did project ASEAN aviation sector to grow at an average annual rate of 6.7% over the next 20 years. And with such easy connectivity and accessibility, ASEAN welcomed up to 102 million international tourists in 2014, or an increase of 3% from 2013. Given the rapid development of the aviation and tourism sectors, ASEAN member states have agreed to formulate non-restrictive arrangement to enable other member states to make use of professional regional tourism experts and skilled workers through the signing of the MRA on tourism professionals. And already, ASEAN is already extending certification to 6,000 tourism professionals based on this MRA. In the trade in services, ASEAN very early recognized the importance of integration in the services sector. The ASEAN Framework Agreement on Services was signed back in September 1995, just 1.5 years after the conclusion of the General Agreement on Trade in Services. And up to now, ASEAN has concluded 8 packages of commitments, with the 9th one now near completion. And work has also begun for the 10th package, which will see more than 100 subsectors committed to liberalization. And work has also begun to enhance the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Services toward greater regional services integration for the post-2015 period. The ASEAN Trade in Services Agreement will take into account the developments like the Trade in Services Agreement in ASEAN's FTA in the AEC Blueprint and other emerging regional architectures. With trade in services increasingly liberalized, ASEAN services suppliers can expand their regional cross-border services supply, and they can consolidate the client base regionally to utilize the economy of scale. Indeed, would set a more conducive environment in 2013. ASEAN exported up to $292 billion and imported nearly $300 billion of services. And on average, ASEAN services export and import grew at 13.4% or and 11.8% respectively since the end of the financial crisis in 2008. And also in 2013, intra-ASEAN trade value in services was up to $98 billion or 16.6% increase. Occupied up to that percentage of the total ASEAN trade in services. So we have only half a year before the deadline for the launch of the AEC. A new or newer environment for growth is already being created. The businesses in ASEAN and ASEAN-based are invited to stay and to come to ASEAN.
Thank you very much. Liu Leong Min, as Secretary General of the ASEAN. Thank you so much, sir, for that. And coming from what he had just said, we just have a few months to go before the full implementation of the ASEAN Economic Community. Joining our panel this morning, Mr. Mustafa Muhammad. He is the Minister of Trade and Industry of Malaysia, and Malaysia is also chairing ASEAN this year. Oliver Tonby, he is the Director of McKinsey & Company in Singapore. Good morning, sir. Ho Sing Chan, Group Managing Head of DuPont Singapore. Ricardo Melendez is the Chief Executive of the Executive International Center and Trade and Sustainable Development. It is a think tank. Lim Cheng Tek is the Chief Executive Officer of the ASEAN Standard Chartered Bank. Now, we have, for our audience, this is also for our audience, you have 10 member nations that are in the ASEAN, all of which are different in terms of development, strength. Some have divided them into three. You have the first, which is Singapore, maybe Malaysia and Thailand. Then developing, right in the middle, Indonesia, Philippines. And then you have the CML, you have Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. All of this, all of the 10 member nations have different rates of growth. Minister, I'd like to ask you first, come December 2015, what exactly are businessmen expecting when ASEAN goes into full gear?
Thank you, Karen. In ASEAN, inclusiveness is very important, and we are all men here. I wish there's a lady in the panel, and we're all quite senior in age. You're the only one who's young, Karen. Anyway, the private sector has got very high expectations. This weekend, ASEAN ministers and leaders are converging in Kuala Lumpur for the summit. We have a summit in the next few days, another summit in November, and at that summit in November, Malaysia would be, is in this position as chair of ASEAN. We would like to declare ASEAN as a community. And as I said, expectations are high. And here in Jakarta, the Regional World Economic Forum, there's been a lot of talk about expectations coming from the private sector.
So what do we expect to change
so firstly,
come December 2015?
Firstly, it's about free movement of goods, services, and people. Yeah, I would say it's not free, freer. If you say free, there's no hassles at the border. But the private sector wants free movement of goods, free movement of services, free movement of people. And that's not going to happen. Yeah,
it's not going to happen.
There'll be freer. There'll be freer movement of goods, freer movement of services, freer movement of people. Yeah? The kind of things that you have. There's this expectation that the border is going to be similar. Yes, we've done a lot in order to reduce barriers at the border. There will continue to be customs, immigration will be there. So that's one perception that we'd like to dispel from the mind of the private sector. Having said that, our priority in ASEAN is to ensure that we facilitate trade, movement of people, immigration and passports. One issue that we've been dealing with is the issue of standards, regulations, different kind of standards in various ASEAN countries. We're working very hard, and we want to, in the area of non-tariff barriers, we would like to reduce as much as possible. So between now and December, 6-7 months ago, we're working very hard in order to reduce all those barriers to trade, non-tariff barriers, trying to get more standardized. Of course, strengthening institutions. We have 6-7 months ago. Yes, we're going to get there, but it is work in progress. Yeah?
All right. Singh, I'd like
We've got to be realistic.
Realistic. Okay, we have to be realistic. I'd like to ask you, Singh, what are the challenges? For example, he said absolutely free is not possible. Freer movement of goods, freer exchange of labor, freer. But you're a businessman. What do you experience?
Okay, let me start out by saying that the AEC has made quite a bit of progress in the area of tariff reduction.
Yeah.
As companies, we can feel that, we can see that, and it enables the freer flow of goods and services. On the other hand, I recently read an article in a survey that talked about, surveyed the business people in Singapore and say, do you know the opportunities and challenges posed by AEC? And more than 80% of the people said no. They have no idea what it is. They don't know the opportunities. They don't know where the threats are.
Yeah.
So the connection between the AEC initiatives that are led by primarily the government side are not translated to the business side sufficiently to enable people to know, understand what to do. So that is one. Second thing, with all due respect around open skies and policies on tourism and all that, I feel that there is a very large segment of the ASEAN population that is not impacted sufficiently by the AEC. And this is the agriculture sector. And in the last few days, we have talked about agriculture extensively. In the morning, we have a session on food security. And on Sunday, we had a whole day session amongst the people in ASEAN to talk about how we can enhance the food security and agriculture productivity in the region. But if I look at the AEC, I am hard-pressed to find out what aspects of that, with some minor exceptions, I would grant that their MRL, for example, harmonization of MRL, which is good, but by and large, not a whole lot to do with that. So let me give you a few examples.
On agriculture.
On agriculture. So the CLMV countries, agriculture is about 25% roughly on average.
CMV, Cambodia,
CLMV,
Myanmar, Vietnam.
Right.
And Laos.
Laos, right. So it's about 25% of their GDP. The rest of the ASEAN countries, Malaysia, the Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, about 10%. China, 10%. So you can think about this and say, well, countries are going to move inevitably towards more urbanization. And therefore, their component of GDP as represented by agriculture is going to start to go down over time. And more people are probably going to move towards the urban areas coming from the farms. So how do we address that issue? And at the same time, we know that food demand is going up, and by 2050, we're going to have 70% more food needed in the world. So as you have limited acreage, you have less people in the farm, you have people going to the city, and so you have less water, and all the issues with climate change. How do we deal with the agriculture sector? I feel that this is not yet perhaps a low-hanging fruit that AEC has tackled, but ought to be tackled from 2016 onwards.
All right, and Oliver, Singh mentions it's a very big and major part of what technically the ASEAN Economic Community should be addressing, which is the common vision for agriculture and food security. Do you believe, coming from McKinsey, that the AEC and the ASEAN address the real needs of the ASEAN region if it wants to be one common marketplace?
So listen, I think the answer is yes, and I choose to be an optimist, and I am a realist. Let's be clear. You asked earlier, is the AEC going to be a success? Yes. The AEC, I think, has already achieved many things. I don't think anything's going to change overnight come the end of the year. This is not a switch that goes on and off. This is a work in progress. It's a journey. And if you look at, 10 countries that are very different in nature, right, very different in nature, actually have something that is starting to resemble one market. Are we going to get there? Listen, it's going to be years and decades until we're there. This is not going to be the European Union number 2. I don't think that's in the vision either.
Why did you say that? Why don't you think? Why can't it be the European Union number 2?
No, listen.
I'm just curious.
The countries are just
Yeah.
too different. You look at the populations of the different countries and the stages of development and the needs of the people. The idea of free flow of people across borders, I think, is going to be a tough one, just as one example. But I don't think that's the important thing. I think the important thing is that this is moving in the right direction. You look at now a huge market, 2.4 trillion GDP under the AEC. You look at significant reduction of tariffs that has happened. But the realist also says, listen, there are many more barriers, many small barriers, if you will, to go. The harmonize, there are different halal standards between Malaysia and Indonesia. Why? There are different, the recognition of different professions between countries isn't happening. So there are many of these barriers that need to be removed for this to realize its full potential.
Cheng Tek, did you want to say something? Go ahead, Ricardo.
No, thank you, Karen. I just want to build on what on your question, also the statement before that you made about the comparison of the ASEAN project with the European Union. And I think I'd like to qualify what we just heard by saying that at the end of 2015, it certainly would not be a European Union, but it would have the basis, perhaps, with an optimistic perspective, to build on its institutions and on its freedoms to become something like the European Union. And I think the European Union is not a bad benchmark to follow. Now, one of the things that you see in ASEAN is that you need still institutions, both at the national level as well as the ASEAN level, to really move the union and really take advantage of the regional markets and provide the kind of welfare benefits for all that people really aspire to. But I think also behind that is the notion, and again, I'm also very optimistic on this, that with ASEAN or without ASEAN, I think these economies are going to really boom in the next few years. You have demographics on their favor, and you have a growing financial well-being that has been distributed in many ways across these countries. You also have many competitive advantages to the ASEAN region. You have the elements really to grow into a very rich region. But more importantly, I think ASEAN is located at the center of the most dynamic region in the world in terms of economics. And again, looking forward to 2025 and 2050, we know that the world is going to tilt towards this region. This is where you're going to have to produce the food, as it was said before, and many of the goods for the rest of the world.
All right. Now, coming from what Ricardo said, Cheng Tek, you have most of the market moving to this side of the world. Comparing it to the European Union, one of the major comments about the European Union is that they're built to help each other. Do you feel that in the ASEAN? Do you feel that the ASEAN is built to actually help smaller countries become more progressive? We do have Singapore, you have Thailand, and you have Malaysia leading the pack. But do you feel that the AEC builds actually the roadmap to lift up the lesser progressive countries?
Thank you. I think if you look at the blueprint of AEC and the framework of AEC, it does provide for the more developed and bigger country to support the smaller and developing country. But I would like to take it at a different dimension and building on the point that Singh has mentioned earlier, which is this awareness of AEC and the benefit of AEC. And among businesses, I think there is a disproportionate understanding of the opportunity. What do I mean? a very particular important segment of business across all the 10 ASEAN member states today do not have sufficient knowledge or access to that knowledge of what the opportunities are. And I'm referring to the SME segment.
Yeah.
The SME segment, if I, is a very important segment across ASEAN. They are big job creator. In some of the ASEAN economy, they account for almost 90% of all the employment. And not only that, they are a big contributor to the economy. So the local businesses within the 10 ASEAN member states have, in my mind, a disproportionately lower understanding of the opportunity and the benefit of AEC. Today, you see most of the forums well attended by multinationals, government agencies, and they share the information freely. But who is to share this information down to the SMEs, and so that they can also benefit from this building of a common production platform, freer movement of trade and services across the 10 member states.
Okay.
Can
Now,
I
you
just
can, yeah, because is it really easy for SMEs to do business across the region?
No, so I was just going to comment on that. I think it's spot on, right? I think there's one is the understanding is different than perhaps lesser. And not only that, but many of the SMEs that we talk to, they're actually even worried about some parts of the AEC. They say, listen, there's going to be more competition. So I think there absolutely is a need to get more SMEs on board, if you will. Because and our belief is that the best SMEs, for the best SMEs, this is a great opportunity, right? The ones that are, if they are producing, goods that are required, that are in demand elsewhere, this is a fantastic opportunity. But right now, many of the SMEs are worried.
Another point that I would add, though, is that across the 10 member ASEAN states, you do have various government initiatives to promote and to support SMEs. Perhaps if you build a pan-ASEAN kind of framework to support and to promote SME, that will go a long way towards reaping some of this benefit of AEC to smaller businesses.
Now, the ASEAN operates by consensus. I think you can answer this, Minister. Is one of the comments I've heard is it seems to be voluntary in nature. Is there some kind of a scorecard where you can actually hold to account the countries that are ASEAN members and say, you know what, we talked about this last year, and how are you doing with how you opened up this regulation? Or how did you streamline it this year? Because there are all these meetings, but then at the end of the day, great commitments. But do you actually score each country and say, you are not performing up to par with what you promised last year?
Thank you, Karen. Before I move to this subject, let me expand a bit on the SMEs. I mean, there's opportunities and challenges, of course. And the big boys, there's no problem. They can venture. The big companies from Singapore know what the opportunities there are in Vietnam. Malaysian companies know what's available in Thailand. So you divide the big and small. So the issue is the smaller guys, small enterprises. And you're right, there's a fear in the minds of some of the small enterprises that my business is going to be totally wiped out, when, January 2016 comes. So what's important is to build this confidence that there are winners and losers, but overall there's going to be a lot of gainers. So it's important to get this buy-in from the smaller people, the small, medium enterprise, that they're going to benefit from closer economic integration. So that's a challenge for us. One is creating awareness. Number two is convincing them that ASEAN is a right approach. Closer economic integration is the best way forward in order to lift living standards, including getting SMEs to be on board and be part of the system. On this scorecard, we do that. Sec-Gen just mentioned.
Yeah. It's just so that you can give a target. Yeah.
We have what we call the AEC scorecard. What we do, we meet and we go through this kind of naming and shaming. I just give you one example. In the area of non-tariff barriers, what we've done is to share what these barriers are. Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and this is on the website. And the mere act of putting that on a website has prompted some of us to resolve some of these issues. So I'm just giving you a small example where
Which is good.
It has worked.
Which is good.
It has worked. But having said that, of course, we want to move faster. So we do have a scorecard, and we know where we are. We are determined, we're committed to reduce them. But of course, we got to be realistic, and it is a journey. What I'm sharing with you, Karen, and fellow panelists, is that we do this on a regular basis. We know where we are, and we have got this 10% to go before we get to December 2015. We know that we're not going to get 100%, which is realistic. We're at 90 now, 91. So this 10% is, of course, the more difficult part. And we're going to get to the almost 100% through this process of consultation, and we do have this scorecard. Yeah? And
so far,
that keeps us on the toes.
which country isn't doing too good on the scorecard?
We know what these countries are, but
No, I don't.
I mean, we meaning we
You're in the
ministers.
panel.
Yeah, we ministers. Yeah, but I mean, there are practical problems. And
Yeah.
We know what these problems are. Some of us are, of course, quite nationalistic. We got some domestic pressures coming from several directions.
No, I'll give you an example, and all of you can comment, which is one small example. Indonesia, for example, has refrained from ratifying the ASEAN Multilateral Agreement for full liberalization of air freight services because, of course, it needs to protect its domestic aviation industry from regional competitors. The Philippines went through this, and by force, of course, the open skies policy went through so much political controversy locally. But this is a very, very simple one. It's one. How do you deal, Oliver and Ricardo, please, all of you can comment. Aren't individual laws of each country, isn't this one major hindrance to really going on one common region as a marketplace, frankly speaking?
I would like to comment on that. You know, the pace of progress of AEC is dependent on the process we choose or the leaders choose to do. And the process is a consensus process. A consensus process by nature needs to get consensus, and it needs to get alignment of all the countries involved. And that requires a balance between the national interests and the AEC interests. And that process, unless, you know, there is a speedier process, which is if there is a strong leadership, whether it's an individual leadership within ASEAN, whether it's a
secretariat.
Either it's a personal leadership, or it's a country leadership, or it's a person that chairs, or the country that chairs that ASEAN particular year, those leadership can progress it faster. But you know, so it's the pace we are seeing is a reflection, a result of what we choose to do as a whole.
Yeah.
And so that's where we are. Now, the other point I want to make is that you know, just now you talk about the national laws and regulations. Here's one thing, I go back to the agriculture sector, that we have in common with the aviation sector. We also have 10 laws and regulations in our ASEAN countries. Each one is tremendously difficult to manage it through. Some of our products that, you know, companies like us devoting billions of dollars to invent.
Correct.
Takes from, you know, in ASEAN between 1 year to 6 years to approve. So this is the kind of difficulty we have to go through each of the countries. And if we had a uniform standards, as Minister Mustafa said, it would help so much. In fact, you know, the whole agriculture sector has a great opportunity.
Can you give one example? For example, give me 2 countries that you needed to pass through, and how many permits did you go through this one, and how many this other one? Because, for example, in Singapore, it takes, I think in the last session I had last year to put up a power plant in Singapore, took Manny Pangilinan 3 weeks to have it signed. In the Philippines, you need 165 signatures. So I'm curious. Go for it.
It's not too bad, but you know, I'm in the same boat of Minister Mustafa. I'm not sure I want to name specific countries, but I can tell you that the big major countries in ASEAN, sometimes are the ones that have difficulty because when you come to agriculture, it is a very politically charged subject. That's probably why AEC is not dealing with it as a first venture. But it needs leadership to step up because we're talking about 55% of the ASEAN population are living in the rural areas.
Yeah.
And that's the majority of the ASEAN people. They're not traveling. They're not crossing countries to work in another country. They're trying to survive, get their lively higher. They're trying to find ways to go into an urban area so their income can improve. How do we deal with this group of people, as an ASEAN economic community, so that we can lift their standards at the same time lifting the standards of the whole region?
Perhaps
Go
three
ahead,
very
sure,
quick
sure,
points.
quick, so-
Firstly, we are at 3 different levels of development. To set the record straight, it is Singapore and Brunei.
Yes,
At the top
okay.
end, you've left out Brunei,
Yeah, you're
very
right.
important country. In
My
the middle will
apologies.
be Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines.
Okay.
In the middle, bottom will be Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. That's number 1.
Yeah.
So, for example, when it comes to tariffs, we
Yeah.
have taken this into account that for the more developed ASEAN states, 1/1/2010, tariffs have been eliminated. But for the other countries,
Yeah.
it's 2018, 1/1/2018. So in the system,
That's
we
agreed.
recognize
Yeah.
with different levels of development. And for these other countries, 0 tariffs. I'm not talking about non-tariff barriers.
Yeah, yes, yes.
0 tariffs, 1/1/2018. Yeah, that's point number 1.
Okay.
Point number 2 is this is 2015, a very important year. And I'm confident that come 2020, for example, the kind of things that we're hearing in a panel, many of these things will be resolved. So
Yeah.
it is a journey. Yeah? It's not going to happen overnight. So we got to be realistic. We all have domestic issues to deal with.
Yeah.
That's point number 2. Point number 3, there's been healthy engagement, consultation between government and private sector in every country. And we're getting more and more interactive. And we'll be getting lots of feedback. And I must say that the private sector has been very positive, constructive in providing us with the feedback that has motivated us to move even faster. So I would encourage those of you, because all of you are from the private sector here, to keep on, telling us, governments, what we need to do. I mean, this is 2015. 2020, I'm confident that, more things will happen. The issue is, why 2020? Why not 2016, 2017? I mean, that's the issue. Thank you.
Minister, I do agree. I do agree with what you said about this being a journey, and I think we should take a much more practical approach to some of these challenges, because it's not that we're going to wake up 2016 1st Jan and everything is going to be different. It is a start of a journey, and there will be speed bumps on this journey. I think the focus will be how do we reduce and how do we eliminate some of the speed bump as it progresses. To your point, Minister, whether do it faster or do it by 2020, I think that is where we need consensus among the 10 member states.
Ricardo, go ahead,
So-
and then Oliver.
Well, there's so many points that have been
Yeah.
made here, but on this specific point, so let me go back again to the example of the European Union that
Sure.
you mentioned before. It has taken since '92 really to calibrate how that market works. Since they set up what could be somewhat equivalent to the 2015 AEC deadline. Well, they were a bit more advanced at that time. But I go back to my point about institutions. You're talking about winners and losers. There's a great concern here about what would happen with labor that is displaced. Not only SMEs, but generally speaking, what happens with the big differences that you have in wages and salaries and other conditions in the cost of factors. And again, in the EU, as it happens also in the US, you have mechanisms for adjustment that have been put in place. One of the biggest expenditures, 10% of the budget of the EU, is what is called the social fund, the European Social Fund. The European Social Fund has been, through the years, organized in such a way that it responds specifically to the kind of displacements and to the kind of distortions that will come, if you like, to national economies from integration, right? For instance, the adoption of the notion of what it's called the flexible labor markets, right? So with this notion, the idea is that you don't have a job for life, you have work for life. And then there are mechanisms, again, within the European Union itself to try to help workers adapt, to innovate in the workplace, to retrain in such a way that again, you can deal with these losers and winners. A last quick point on SMEs is that SMEs in ASEAN, if they think about the way in which the global economy works today, they would understand that on one hand, you're providing them with larger markets once you integrate. But on the other hand, you're providing them with the opportunity to be integrated into value chains, into supply chains, both at the regional level, but also even at the global level. Value chains where, again, ASEAN is one of the big champions in the world, is the heart of what is called Factory Asia, really, today. With the rising cost of labor in China, there are great opportunities now in this region to really be integrated into those global markets. So SMEs need to be told by governments. If governments are believers in this integration, they should be much better at selling the benefits of that integration by highlighting these kind of opportunities.
Very good points. I'll take up some of your points later. Oliver?
No, I just wanted to say, listen, we've analyzed some of the different costs around the region, and what is some of the opportunity here if we reduce some of these barriers, the non-tariff barriers. Just to pick one area, in many manufacturing sectors, we see that you can reduce costs by 20%, which means that you can have 20% lower price to your customers by optimizing the whole supply chain. For example, you asked for some specific numbers. The ports and terminal handling days in Singapore, it takes 1 day, whereas in Indonesia, Philippines takes 3 days. You look at customs clearance, technical controls, Malaysia, Singapore, 1 day, Vietnam, Myanmar, 3.5, 4 days. This translates into real costs.
Yeah.
And we've estimated that at order magnitude 20%, obviously, depending on what sector we're talking about and so forth.
That's a good
These are real costs.
Oliver, are you able to achieve that today, or you're talking about the future state?
This is if we manage to continue to chip away at some of these non-tariff.
So not today yet?
Not today, no.
Minister,
I
do you
think,
talk about these things, for example, something as practical as
I
that?
think
when you have
benchmarking
meetings?
and sharing of best
Yeah.
practices is very much
Yes.
part of ASEAN. We see each other a lot, and of course we have these numbers.
Yeah.
And that the peer pressure is another. This is not something that
Peer
that's
pressure.
Peer pressure.
Yeah, okay.
So Singapore, Malaysia does things perhaps a little bit more efficient in other countries. So that puts pressure on other countries, and that's one very powerful motivation for us to move faster. We want to make ASEAN a very competitive economic region. We want to attract FDIs. Last year was about 120 billion. Already,
Yeah.
China is about
Yeah.
104, 105 billion. ASEAN,
Yeah.
122 billion FDIs. We want to make ASEAN even more attractive. You imagine, now it's 1 day in Malaysia, Singapore, customs clearance, 3-4 days in other parts of ASEAN. If all of us, through peer pressure and benchmarking, can move up and improve, you can imagine the FDIs, the trade we can do. So these are the low-hanging fruits, but that drives us, that motivates us to do better
Okay.
in terms of enhancing productivity and efficiency.
All right. Now, I want your thoughts on this because Ricardo talked about the European Social Fund. A survey was done recently on actually constituents, members, residents who live in ASEAN, and 3 out of 4 didn't even know what ASEAN meant. Okay, 3 out of 4 didn't know what ASEAN meant. Now, something common. People know when residents in Europe, when they see the European Union flag, they know, they recognize it. There's a European Union Parliament.
But that took a long time.
Took a long time. So this is where I'm going. Do you think this is necessary? In other words, for the branding of ASEAN itself, to move it to that period wherein it is a legitimate, strong region, and you are already branding it as a region that has a common vision. Do you all think, give me your thoughts, what about an ASEAN parliament? People have asked this, an ASEAN flag. Foreigners going into ASEAN, we don't even have a Schengen visa. There's no ASEAN visa. If you're a foreigner coming in, you'd have to get your own visa going to Thailand, your own visa going to the Philippines. They seem small, but in the end, they contribute to that common vision of a region. Tell me your thoughts.
Of course, on travel and tourism, it's happening and will happen one day.
The ASEAN passport.
I'm pretty sure passport and the visa, so that's not a big issue.
Okay.
It is an issue now, but it will happen. On the European Parliament, of course, we have different systems, as you know, democracy, we have elections, we have monarchy.
How would you do it then?
So
Because right now you
we have
meet ad
started.
hoc.
We have started by having interaction among members of parliament, where there's parliament. So here again, it is a journey. I think it is important to have some kind of a political institution, but I don't see this happening in the foreseeable future. Having an ASEAN parliament. But what we've done is a regular gathering of representatives from all those countries, and it is an evolution. And it's going to happen. It's a matter of time. Closer political integration as well. So on travel, there are challenges now, but I think it's going to happen. And the issue again is, why can't it happen now? Why should we 2020? And so there's a lot of pressure coming from the private sector. So it will happen, and this will be a big boost to tourism and travel in the region.
What would help? Go ahead. Any suggestions? So now you feel anything that could solidify the ASEAN image and the ASEAN brand?
I think to me, the more important goal, at least in the near term, is really the economic integration, rather than all these, I would call them nice to have rather than must have as a start. So you talk about ASEAN identity, the ASEAN Parliament, I think that could be something that we decide, say, if it's desirable, and then maybe at a later stage. But at this stage, I think there's much more to be gained by fostering a closer economic integration. And one needs to look at ASEAN as in economic term, that the whole is greater than the sum of parts. So if you can pull all the 10 member states to work together towards closer economic integration, I think this will generate employment opportunity, attract investment, and to Sing's point, help create wealth and improve the livelihood of the ASEAN population.
I think there are, economy is important, and I think is one of the very important parts of ASEAN, but I don't think we should forget the other things either. Professor Kishore from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy says that one of the remarkable things about ASEAN is that there has not been a major war in the last several decades. And part of the reason for that is the increased collaboration, cooperation inside of ASEAN. So I do think there are other parts out in addition to the economy. I think one area is even greater collaboration on topics like culture, sports, arts, because I think that would actually help promote the positive feeling of ASEAN. So I think there's room on other areas too.
I agree with that. Ricardo.
No, I think, again, following on that thought, that, and I'm becoming a broken record, but you started with the comparison with Europe. But ASEAN, as was the case with the European Union, was created to promote peace, stability, democracy, and it has been incredibly successful. And that's how it's been seen from abroad. Now the next step, it's an economic integration, and that's where it is. It's taken a long time. It's been a complex process. Right now, the region is not what academics call spaghetti ball. Is really noodles ball, which is very complex. Now, in the larger Asia region, you have close to 190 bilateral agreements between countries and about 70 other regional agreements between countries. Now, all that needs to be simplified, and that's what would happen with the Asian Economic Community for this region. And that's a very big step forward. Now, you need what you said before, even before you get into the other dimensions of integration, the political dimension and others, you need what you said before. You need, again, the big countries in the region, particularly, but it's equally important for everyone, to believe in the project of integration, and then to sell that to its societies. And to sell it, you need a great deal of effort. It doesn't happen from one day to the other. You need the farmers and the small and medium enterprises and investors and just the consumers anywhere in Asia to understand what the integration of ASEAN is going to do for each of them. And again, for that you probably need also a stronger ASEAN-wide institutions, which is also my point from the beginning. That's something that is very important. It's perhaps the next step after you finish with this 2015 blueprint.
Sing.
If I could, pick up on Cheng Tek's point. You think about a factory worker sitting in Indonesia who has no notion what ASEAN is because they have not touched by ASEAN. They don't read the papers. They don't get the communication.
No,
they have no idea what ASEAN is. Right, they won't get the benefit. Now, if the ASEAN is able to help that factory to expand its production and goods are selling to Thailand, going to Vietnam, this worker all of a sudden sees, oh, what I make is going overseas. And my job is expanded, our factory is expanded, we have more opportunities. Then they can see ASEAN. What is ASEAN? How is it impacting them? This is the economic factor on that individual.
I'll give you two very quick examples. Malaysian companies, small, medium enterprises, they source some materials from Indonesia. So they fly Asia, go to Bandung, Surabaya, buy some of the agricultural products which are used as raw materials, which are in short supply. We used to produce them, but we're no longer competitive. So ASEAN SMEs, I mean Malaysian SMEs are already benefiting from sourcing some of these requirements from Indonesia. Number one. Number two, we have weddings, all of us, family weddings, and you need presents. And if you buy from Malaysia, it might cost about 2-3 times higher. So what some Malaysians do, they take AirAsia, they go to Ho Chi Minh City, for example, and what costs, say, $5 in Malaysia costs $1 in Ho Chi Minh City. So these are the benefits that SMEs do not quite know, but in actual fact, they're reaping the benefits of ASEAN economic integration. The fact that there are zero tariffs when they land in Malaysian airport, bring a product from Bandung, Surabaya, or Ho Chi Minh City, there are no taxes, and that goes in the pockets of the ordinary Malaysian. So it's happening everywhere. So these are some of the clear benefits. And what you need to do is to tell them that you're already reaping the benefits of closer ASEAN economic integration. Those are the good things. Of course, there are challenges as well. I'm not saying that there are no challenges. And I think this peace and prosperity, I think, is important. Just to set the record straight, the political, the economic, social, cultural, these are the three pillars of ASEAN. So we're moving together. I mean, we're the political community, we're declaring ASEAN as a community based on those three pillars. We're not saying we're going to declare ASEAN as an economic community. We're doing all three at the same time. Political community, greater peace, prosperity in the region, economic community, and social cultural community. That's happening at the end of this year on all three fronts.
Good. In a few minutes, we'll be opening the floor for questions. We have a few minutes for questions, so please raise your hand. We have a director on the floor who could be giving you the microphone. You have a question, sir? Two questions from 3, 4.
My name is Srinivas Rao. I'm based in Zurich in Switzerland. I think there are quite a few topics that have been talked about ASEAN as a joint force, but I think these could be divided into two different categories. One is becoming a stronger force together from an outside perspective, so you compete with India's and China's and LATAM's and go to the market in the West and say we are a joint force, and you talked about FDIs coming in. The other aspect is more regional, where you focus on how you benefit within the group and you're not worried about too much about the outside world. So from the vision perspective, Minister, you talked about, which is your more dominant action at this point in time? Are you more concerned about how we are benefiting within the ASEAN community, or you're more focused on how do we present ourselves as a much stronger force to the outside community?
That's a great question.
The three dimensions, the internal and external. Internal will be the dynamics within the 10 ASEAN member states. There's more intra-ASEAN trade, more intra-ASEAN investment. For example, intra-ASEAN investment is about 20% now. It used to be quite small. Malaysian investing in Indonesia, Indonesia investing in Malaysia. It used to be very, very small. That's growing. Intra-ASEAN trade, about 25%, and we hope that will grow. So this has been a very important outcome of closer economic integration, and these numbers will
But what is your more dominant focus?
Okay, external, is, of course, is important. As I said, more 120 billion FDIs last couple of years come to. That's important. We want to make ASEAN, and this is important for jobs. Trade is very important. All of us are very open economies. Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand. These are very open economies. So external dimension is important. And in light of China and India, of course, it will become even more important. So I would say, of course, it's both. It's unfair for me to say that the domestic dimension is more important than external, because we are very open. We depend on FDIs. We depend on trade. Malaysia is a trade-dependent economy. So it's the same is true Singapore and Vietnam. So I would say, so we want to do this in parallel. In as much as we build our domestic resilience, increasing inter-ASEAN trade, we want to engage with the world. China, India, these countries are important. Europe and America, they're also important. So if you ask me, we want to do this in parallel. Strengthening the internal dynamics, at the same time, strengthening our links with the outside world in as far as trade investments are concerned.
Okay, before the next question, I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. This is going to be very quick. China isn't a member of the ASEAN, and yet all of the ASEAN member countries trade with China the most. And if you've been watching the news, there's been an issue, of course, with China's very aggressive reclamation activities in the South China Sea, in the contested territories of so many ASEAN claimant countries. I wanted to ask you, should ASEAN speak as, would it help for ASEAN to speak as a group, as a, you're smiling, when it comes to something as controversial, for example, as China, because you have the United States speaking, wherein the United States is far off our region, but because of the pivot to Asia, they have more interest, but ASEAN, wherein it is the neighbor, and then it's very mum. It has not issued a strong statement on anything. All of you, please, give me your thoughts.
We start with our
Your thoughts.
You talk
I
about,
can't go last.
you talk
Yeah,
about
yeah, okay,
political,
go, please.
economic,
Skip-
social.
skip
This is
too
a
much.
political question,
Absolutely,
probably.
because the thing about having to be one common group, all of this trade, economy, even the geopolitical aspect, that all goes into it. So I want to ask your thoughts on that. Let's start with Ricardo. You're a think tank.
So
Will
I
it
think,
help? Should ASEAN have one stand?
well, I live in Geneva. I don't live here, and I want to be able to come back, but as well as to China.
Yeah,
But
You will.
okay, and so that goes with the response. I'm a big believer of liberal economics, and I think that by integrating more and more with China, you're probably going to get into a situation
No,
of,
but my question was
of
about
interdependence,
Yeah,
right?
go ahead.
Between the region and China, that would hopefully buffer and soften those tensions. So my response would be yes, of course, a stronger integrated ASEAN would be a much better partner for China too.
Okay, that's a good one. Oliver?
Well, listen, I think it's one of the bigger worries, the relationship with China and what's happening in the South China Sea, as well as other geopolitical issues around the world. I think is one of the bigger worries many folks have. You know, listen, I don't know what the right answer to your question is, whether, you should, speak up louder. I think the ASEAN way is to have more dialogues and try to resolve things before they escalate. So, and I believe that is happening, and I'm sure there are others that are more qualified in the room to answer such questions.
In the room?
Well,
I'm teasing you, Minister.
ideally, we should be speaking with one voice.
Ideally.
But
Okay.
that's not happening because, of course, it's a very complicated issue, and we would prefer this to be discussed, bilaterally. Of course, we have the ASEAN foreign ministers process, which is actively engaged on this. It is a delicate subject. China is a very important country to all of us, and peace and stability is very important. And of course, we do not want to rock the boat. Whatever we do, we want to ensure that there's peace, stability in the region. That's very essential for the survival, long-term survival of ASEAN, peace, stability. So whatever we do, that's bottom line. We want to ensure that there's peace, stability in the region.
But I appreciate you. You're very diplomatic, but quite forthright. Okay, next question, sir.
I'm Farad Forbes from Forbes Marshall in India. I have a question. There are many other economic cooperation agreements, like most notable would be the AEC, for example. Are there any aspects of such an agreement which one would want to avoid in the ASEAN context? Are there any aspects of that any learnings from that which one would wish to be cautious about? It'd be interesting to hear the response on that. And just a very quick comment on SMEs. There was a comment made earlier about SMEs and the concern that SMEs would have about the opening up of the economies and tariffs coming down. Our own example in India, when we had liberalization 20 years ago, tariffs came down very significantly. And actually, SMEs did fine. They did fine. The increased competition actually brought out the best in them. So I would just like to make that as a comment.
Okay, who would like to answer his question? Any learnings from EC? Go ahead, Ricardo.
So two quick responses of something that is much more complex. But I'd say in the European space, the monetary union probably has not yet proven to be the most wise of decisions. But where I come from Colombia, from South America. We've had a mix of experiences with integration. We started before you started here with what was called the Andean community. Then we learned that if you don't have identity of purpose between the members, this is going to disintegrate very easily. That's one point. The second point is that we build the community on protecting and building big walls around us, and then using import substitution as a means for development. And that didn't work at all. And so we have to shift 180 degrees. I was part of that team that went into that shift. And the shift to 180 degrees has now resulted in something that is much more beneficial to the members of what is now called the Pacific Alliance, which is a set of countries that are identified in their purpose, which are going into deeper integration, similar to what you're doing here. They started actually with a very interesting element, which was bringing together the stock exchanges, and then moving on into other types of integration. And they have very similar aims to what you have here. But I think that the big lesson from the past there is that you need absolute identity of purpose. And that's what I said before. You need this Asian economic community to be one of believers. You want the big ones and the small ones and the richer ones to believe in what you're doing. You talk about the air, the freedoms of air traffic. Indonesia has got about 16 major airports, but Singapore's got one. And there's a disparity in the exchange that you can have, but you have to think about the wider welfare gains and then the wider trade-offs between different types of concessions, if you like, to the integration. So you have to believe in that integrated market for the market to happen. I think that's really the big lesson. I think in Europe, just thinking very quickly, the other thing that I would say very personally is that there's a certain size for an integrated market. Beyond that size, you start getting into trouble.
Yeah. So is ASEAN the right size?
I think that's why I like ASEAN. Because I think
it's not too big.
You have then the possibility of going into this RCEP, which is the ASEAN +6, but in different terms. It's not about an economic community, right? And that's okay. It would give an ASEAN economic community would actually give this region greater strength to integrate through trade agreements with their neighbors and with the rest of the world.
Okay, good one. That next question. After Sir, then you.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Littman, and I'm with the Global Agenda Council on the Future of Tourism.
Okay.
But I want to ask the panel, and particularly the Minister, a question about the potential for ASEAN around an elephant in the room that, to my amazement, not one person has mentioned. And that is the issue around being a catalyst for green growth. Because this year, 3 heads of state summits, culminating with a climate-related summit, which is not just another issue, it's an existentialist issue. All the countries in ASEAN have got green growth strategies. There is, outside ASEAN, but in this region, a Green Growth Institute in Korea. And it seems to me that if you take a strategic view, you have a huge opportunity, not only for a global leadership position, but to benefit in so many other areas, green jobs and education. So I'd like to see if there's any comment on what is really a change-making potential.
All right, that's a good one. Is ASEAN particular about green growth? Are you making genuine moves? Is there a game changer on that?
Yes, ASEAN is very diverse. Forests in many parts of ASEAN. We've got lots of assets, minerals, and we're learning a lot from our friends. There's good collaboration, I think, in forestry between ASEAN and Korea, for example. And indeed, I mean, we need to identify what these areas are where there's common ground. And certainly, green growth is not very controversial. It is one of those.
But is it a priority?
Yes,
I mean, honestly?
it can be. It is not yet a priority at this point in time because we're focusing when we talk about political, economic, social, cultural education. I mean, those things appear to be our priorities. But this is something that we can latch on there where there's a lot of convergence, and certainly in the context of climate change, we can play a leadership role in as far as green growth is concerned.
All right, another question from the floor. I think we'll have the gentleman first in front. Do we still have time for another question, or this is the last question? My apologies to the others.
My name is Jacob Robbins. I live in Singapore. I'm chief executive of a company called Emitera that does investments in agribusiness and also representing a private equity fund called Olympus Capital in the same space. My question relates to agricultural tariffs, something that Mr. Ho referenced earlier during the discussion. The comment I want to make is that instead of trying to square the circle, we should perhaps be attempting to circle the square, much like the design of this room. And by that I mean, let's call a spade a spade. We know that there are issues between those who lead and those who lag and those who have nothing to lose in terms of granting market access. So as an investor, we have confused signals about, from an agricultural perspective, where to invest. Should I invest in a Thailand, where my produce will get easy access to, say, an Indonesia? Or should I be investing in Indonesia, where I can expect to have some degree of market protection for the next 5 or 10 years? So why not set a timetable for agricultural produce in particular that reflects this reality, as opposed to setting yourself up to fail, manage the expectations, and lay out a timetable that's more relevant, more practical, instead of having one date where there is this expectation of normalizing all tariffs, which we all know in reality is going to be a challenge.
Can I ask you the question? It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Why didn't you think of investing in Myanmar or Vietnam or Laos?
Why do I not?
Yeah, I mean...
No, it's on the horizon.
I'm just curious, yeah.
No, it's on the horizon. I mean, every country is unique. Every country has got its own challenges. But even if I were to invest in a country like a Myanmar, I'd be doing it for purposes of exploiting the potential of the domestic market, but equally trying to raise productivity there to access a market which I might not be able to access within ASEAN. So if tariff protection is going to be there in Indonesia for something that I can produce in a Myanmar, it's going to send me a mixed signal. So my question is, why not lay out the tariff structure for ag produce in a way that reflects what is going to happen, right?
Is that possible? I think you're the only one in the room who can answer that too.
I think calling a spade, I think that's a very important principle.
Yeah.
And agriculture is a very sensitive subject in many parts of the world, and probably more sensitive in the developed parts. Having said that, Malaysian companies are here in Indonesia investing in a big way in plantations. Malaysian companies are in Myanmar investing in rubber. Yeah. Because that's the overall picture that you painted. But investments, there's quite a lot.
Can you lay out? He's asking, can you lay out?
Yeah. I mean, there's a proposal. I must say I'm not too familiar what's happening on the agricultural front, but I agree with you that you need to call a spade. And in respect of tariffs and non-tariff barriers, I mean, in my area of responsibility, we have laid out what this challenge is. We have a blueprint, we have a plan for tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and we have a plan. We come up with a plan on SME development. So I don't see a major obstacle in having a similar kind of blueprint or plan for agriculture.
This is why I think
you should be able. If you were to suggest one major recommendation to the ASEAN Secretariat on what to tackle when it comes to agriculture, what would it be that would be the game changer?
Yeah. So first, I go back to the point that we need to lift agriculture to the centerpiece of AEC discussion agenda. And within that, I would say work on harmonization of regulations around the region so that we can improve food safety. Harmonization does not mean relaxation. It is actually a very, very rigorous process that all the member countries agree that they can use the same standards, the same tools, and then allow these new registration products to come in with minimum hindrance. And I think that would go a long way to allow the farming community to have the opportunity to bring in the best products, the highest knowledge content products into the country, into the region.
All right, I want to thank you for that, Singh. We don't have enough time, but I'd like to ask just a very brief closing statement from each of our panelists this morning. I think one clear message that we got from all our panelists and even questions from the audience is even with limitations, boundaries, differences, the ASEAN makes a good marketplace. It makes one good economic community if done in the right way. I think identity of purpose was a very clear message that you can get from all issues, whether it's agriculture, tourism. If you have one identity and purpose that benefits the whole region, then you have more chances of the ASEAN actually becoming more successful. But as the minister has said, free doesn't mean free. It's freer. And I think that's the key word this morning when it comes to the ASEAN economic community. Maybe one quick statement from each of you. What do you think would make ASEAN really work if you were to put it in one sentence?
I think strong institutions, both at the national and at the ASEAN-wide level, that respond really to the fears that people have of integration and again, ensure the well-functioning of the market. So competition policy, the kind of social and labor policies that I mentioned before, and obviously all this package of inclusiveness, as well as a direction towards sustainability, green growth.
Ricardo Melendez-Ortiz, thank you very much, sir. Sheng Tek.
I think to point that Ricardo has made, I think we need to talk more about achievement that we make under the blueprint. So once we have launched this from December 2015, let's celebrate some of the successes that we have achieved, and success begets success.
I like that. Celebrate the successes we've achieved. Success begets success. Thank you very much, Sheng Tek Lim. The minister will be last. Hing Saj, sir,
Sure.
Sing.
I would say continuing to engage in dialogue and build trust. And I think somebody mentioned that trust is really the underlying factor that's going to speed up the AEC process. So engage and build trust, and to the extent we can, bring leadership into the process.
All right, thank you very much. Sing Chan Ho, thank you, sir. Oliver.
I think we should stop talking and just do it.
All right, I like it. You sound like an ad, but I won't mention what. No, that's fine. Oliver Tonby, thank you, sir. And
the ASEAN brand is gaining traction, and investments and trade, facilitation, and peace and prosperity, and the peace dividend and high incomes. These are very important. Having said that, of course, we need to get more buy-in from small, medium enterprises, young people, the villagers, rural people. That's a challenge for us. But we are clearly on the road. This is a very interesting, exciting journey, and inshallah, we're getting there.
thank you very much, Minister of Trade and Industry of Malaysia, Minister Mustafa Mohammed. Thank you so much for joining us in this morning's session. I'm Karen Davila, and I think the message is we do hope you invest in ASEAN. Thank you.